Da da dee da 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 da. Hello. This is building the fleets of Trafalgar, and well, it's an interesting topic to discuss. It really is. Mainly, it's interesting because I started out doing a video, and it was very much like the wooden walls construction video, and it had all the things about, well, actually, building the fleets of Trafalgar started hundreds of years before they actually fought the battle and that sort of thing. And I went, well, yeah, but that's true. And when we're saying that, to put in context, the ship which was launched in 1749, the Rayo of the Spanish Navy, the oldest ship out the battle, and I'll get into discussing her more in a bit. Well, how do I put this politely? She'd started construction roughly 3 years before that, which, if you consider the Spanish did season their wood, so you're talking about probably 5 years before that the wood was felled, so we're talking roughly 1741. If you consider the age of some of the trees involved in the cutting down and preparing for her were about 300 years. You are basically saying that 1450 is roughly when some of those trees dated from. If we consider what 1450 in Spain was like, well, how do I put this politely? The Reconquista of Spain had not actually finished by that point. That goes on till roughly 1492. So therefore there are trees which were growing up many decades before the Reconquista of Spain, which are later on providing the wood in the ships which are fighting at the Battle of Trafalgar. It's amazing to think about. It really is amazing. And so, 1749. That was when the Rayo was launched. And we're looking at wood. Some of the wood is from 1450. Most of the wood we are going to be talking about today, most of the trees, will have been roughly late 1400s, early 1500s. So, late 15th, early 16th centuries. That's when we're talking about the wood that's being used, especially if it's oak. So, yeah. Fleets in the Age of Sail are really a long-term construction plan. And that's one of the reasons why ships and capturing enemy ships matters so much. Because if you're waiting on your supplies for centuries, absolute centuries, you kind of want to maximize any use of resource you can get. I mean, that's a level of long-term planning. I'm fairly certain no one in the 1450s was actually planning on someday we want to launch a first rate, which will carry around 100 guns. I just don't think they were having that conversation in the 1450s. They might have been. There is always an option that I am wrong, but I don't think so. But that's not really the topic I want to get into, the length of the wood and the discussion of those things, because, how do I put it? I've already done that in building the wooden walls. And building the fleets of Trafalgar comes in a lot more than just the story of we had to grow trees for an awful long time. Then some of those didn't actually make the grade to even be cut down, so those we left to just keep growing other trees. or we chop them down for firewood, and then we chop some down. We'd season the wood by leaving it for years to dry out, because frankly, if we put unseasoned wood in our ships, they tend to fall apart in like seconds. It's just so annoying. I don't know why, but using green wood is just so bad. That's what unseasoned wood tends to be called, green wood. The thing is, the seasoning process itself can ruin wood. Wood can bend, wood can do all sorts of weird things. It can even twist in the seasoning, and then it becomes useless as well. It's just so much fun. You have to watch all these sections of wood, and that's before you get onto the fact that you have to have literally huge sheds and sheds of wood laying around, drying. Just think about the fire safety risk going on. Shame's book plug. Always good to do a Shame's book plug. Yes, their second edition of this is out, the paperback edition. Please do buy from, well, USNI, from Pen and Sword, from anyone. It really does support your friendly naval historian. As regular viewers will know, currently my entire income basis is this channel, the occasional TV work, and this book, especially until I get the next books out, which I'm working on, and I'm going to be hopefully doing soon, but frankly, thank you very much. I have a very expensive book habit to support that underpins quite a lot of this research and quite a lot of the videos. So, thank you for your support. Thank you for your help, and thank you for sharing and liking the videos and subscribing, supporting, becoming a member, patron, all those things. So, let's have a quick discussion of the battle. And it's only going to be a quick discussion of battle because we're really looking at the fleets today. We're not looking at the battle. I've done videos about the battle. Lots of videos about the battle. And the campaign. So, what are we talking about? Well, this battle is interesting because it uses the fleets to go right at each other. This is not a new or startling thing. Honestly, breaking the line has been the fixation of pretty much every single navy for 100 or so years at this point. The trouble is, breaking a line is very difficult. You're basically rolling against, how do I put this politely, a load of unsinkable artillery forts, and they are able to maximize their fire at you while you can't fire at them. It requires an extremely high level of training on your part, extremely high level of discipline, self-discipline, and more importantly than anything, amongst the crew. Not enforced discipline, it has to be self-discipline, because you can't enforce discipline under this circumstance. Because you are going to be losing people. And officers, etc., NCOs are probably some of the people you're going to lose most quickly. So, if your crew aren't self-disciplined to do the job, then no amount of external top-down pressure is going to help you. You've also got HMS Africa just showing up and doing Africa things. I always love that it's in this earlier map. They have HMS Neptune up there. They've got it wrong. They've put Africa back here on the sort of the Nelson's line. And actually, Africa was up here where Neptune is. They've got it wrong. And that's not unusual. There are all sorts of interesting parts about this battle, people getting it wrong. What is most interesting about this battle is, realistically, it could have been even more one-sided. It's often marketed as being very one-sided, and in part that's because the Royal Navy, thanks to attacking in columns, manages to concentrate strength versus weakness and divide up the enemy fleets so that, frankly, the enemy fleet can never match their strength versus the Royal Navy's strength. As much as that artillery blast as they're coming in does damage and it causes trouble, the very nature in which the line is divided with these columns means that they're divided. They cannot, unless you turn your ships around and try and organize and come back. And that takes time. You are moving at the speed of the wind, and if you go into the wind, if you're going against the wind to try some of your maneuvers, that's just going to take even longer. It just is. It's going to take even longer. It's a hard-fought battle. Please, do not interpret anything I'm saying as saying the Franco-Spanish fleet does not fight hard. They fight really hard. And they have some really good ships. And the Spanish some really interesting ships. But, honestly, they're not in a good scenario for them. They are, from the get-go in many ways, Villeneuve, the French fleet commander who is in charge of the combined fleet, is... he's been mentally defeated by Nelson from the get-go. Not by Nelson himself. Nelson hasn't outfought him from the get-go or anything like that. No. The image in Villeneuve's head of Nelson, of the Royal Navy, has beaten him from the get-go. From the get-go, he has thought the plan he is doing is nigh on impossible to suicidal, and that is not the concept you need. You need a commander who's a realist. Don't get me wrong, you cannot afford to have one who is off in cloud cuckoo land going, I will be great, and we will manage to overcome them somehow. I don't know how, but we will overcome them. You need someone who can go and look at a problem and go, right, so this is the problem. What do we have as a solution? What can we do? Because there were ships in the French line. They couldn't do as much practice and firing their guns because they were in port. Well, you could do dry runs with your guns. You can do musketry drill. You can do all sorts of those sort of things, which is what some of the captains did do, and their ships performed brilliantly in the battle. But the thing is, as an admiral, your job is to ensure that goes to the whole fleet is doing the best practice, not just some ships who have captains who are actually particularly motivated. It doesn't happen. Why is it not happening? Because in Villeneuve's mind, nothing he does can overcome his obstacle. And it's not just even Nelson. It's that, yes, if he wins against Nelson, that's great. He still has to take on the Channel Fleet, which is going to be even bigger. And this is the big problem for the Franco-Spanish fleet at this point. Yes, this is an important force the British are sending against them. But it's one of their important forces they're able to gather to send against them. They will take on these at this fleet at Trafalgar. They have already fought a smaller action against another portion of the Royal Navy's fleet. And if they got past this one, they would bump into another larger force of the Royal Navy, which is sitting up in the Bay of Biscay. This is the problem for them. It's logistics. And even if they win those fights, they're going to take a lot of damage winning those fights. They're going to lose crew, they're going to have ships damaged, they're going to have problems which they're going to have to deal with. And any time they lose works against them. Because of the depth of resources, and the more time the British are allowed, the more they can mobilise, and the more they will mobilise. Now, if we consider the stats, and this is where it gets quick and dirty. By the way, if you hear a ship name at Trafalgar, and people go, so what do you think this ship is? If in doubt, answer third rate. If you don't know, if you've never heard the name before, it's at Trafalgar, and they say, what do you think that ship was? Answer third rate. Why? 49 out of 73 at the battle were third rates. 49. What does that mean? Well, if 49 out of 73 are third rates, you're having some fun. You really are. Because overall, I'm trying to do the maths in my head, I'd say that's roughly 75%. But it's definitely greater than 2/3. 2/3 of the ship. 60 of the 73 ships at the battle are ships of the line, i.e. third rates or greater. There are some fifth rates there. There aren't any fourth rates. There are some very interesting third rates. Some of them are 64s, and some of them are 80s. And that's always an interesting thing, because people go, well, hang on, it requires an 84 or higher to be a second rate, but so why are these not? Why don't they make that third rate? Second rate's 80 or above. It's to do with the number of decks. Okay, if you're 80 guns and you're on 2 decks, you're a third rate. If you're 84 guns and you're on 3 decks, you're a second rate. If you're 98 guns and you're on 3 decks, you're a second rate. If you're 100 guns and you're on 3 decks, you're a first rate. It's the joy of some arbitrary calculations. But it also does make sense. It really does. And then you look at sort of the navies involved and you go, well, hang on, the Royal Navy has brought less third rates than the Franco-Spanish fleet. They have 29 between them. The Royal Navy has 20. But the Royal Navy has 3 first rates and 4 second rates that they are bringing alone. Spanish are bringing 4 first rates alone. The French have got no first rates and no second rates. I would say some of the Spanish ships are truly massive. And one of the interesting stats was, it was very quickly when I was going through and putting together some of the quirks of this battle and talking about the fleets, as I normally do, very quickly it became quite obvious that there were some big differences and discussions to be had between the different fleets. Including that, I would argue, one of the fleets has been built for war. One of the fleets is being built for ego in the way it's being constructed. Especially the speed of construction. And one of the fleets has been built for deterrence. And you can see that in their sizing, their shaping, their orientation of their ships. And when you look at the wider fleet, that's really proved true. But you see this most when you're looking at the forces they're sending to the Battle of Trafalgar, what they have available for it, and what they're going to be used for. Now, the youngest ships at the battle, there are 3 of them. They are all 1805. There is HMS Revenge, who is at the top here. There is the Pluton, which I think is the ship at the back here. And there is a Duguay Tron, which is potentially the ship at the front. Potentially. In her later form. Now, these ships are all 74s. They are all 74s. And that's no surprise. That is the standard of third rate. Again, if someone goes, oh, double down, it is a third rate. What number, how often are its guns? Answer, 74. There are 6 80-gun third rates at the battle. And there are a handful of 64s. So, if in doubt, it's a 74-gun third rate. If in doubt. If you make an absolute guess, and it's a £1 million question, who wants a millionaire, and you've got no lifelines left, so you can't call Dr. Clarke, me, you can't call, Drac, you can't call anyone, you have to come up with it, and you're going, I don't know, 74-gun third rate. The odds are in your favour. Anything else I'll be mentioning today? Hopefully it'll stick in your head. So, these ships have an interesting career. They really do. The Duguay-Trouin becomes the Implacable. The Revenge, she stays in service till 1849. The Implacable stays in service of the Royal Navy till, believe it or not, 1949. She's scuttled. She's a Temeraire class ship of the line. And the Pluton, well, she ends up becoming a Spanish ship in 1808 and is broken up in 1816. Well, it's good for the Spanish when they switch sides. They get all sorts of nice new ships, which were sitting in harbour. The trouble is, most of them were Temeraire class, which were... How do I put this politely on the Temeraire class? The French planned 120. They completed 107. And 18 of those 107 served in the Royal Navy. What can I say? The British liked the Temeraire design. What they didn't like was the fact that the speed of construction had meant that not all of them were built to the same standard and quality of wood. Because Napoleon wanted them quickly. He wanted them then. And please note, the Temeraire class are built by the Dutch, they're built by all sorts of people as well, because they are a good design of a 74. They are really the standard design of a 74. And in fact, I think... Yes, they're in my list for Key Ship Series 8, I think. Yes, Key Ship Series 8. Landing craft are in Key Ship Series 9. Yeah. So they'll be coming out at some point on this channel. I'll be talking about some classes of Age of Sail ships, because they are key ships. They are important. And these useful ships served a long time. Revenge is probably the most interesting to me, because she's sort of an experimental one produced by the Royal Navy. She was a large 74. And she's the only class of one of the large 74s. The Royal Navy was looking at large 74s, which is built to her draft. So is the only one built to her hull design. So she's considered class of 1. Large 74s are interesting because they are armed with 32-pounder guns on the gun deck, and on the upper gun deck, instead of having 18-pounders, they have 24-pounders. So she carried 30 24-pounders. Now, why does that have an impact? Well, if you think about the impact of a 24-pounder ball versus an 18-pounder ball, that's an impact. If you consider you are, at this period, adding what is in effect 90 pounds to your broadside. £90. So in effect they've gone from what would normally be a 15 gun, a 15 18-pounder on that upper gun deck, on that in the broadside, to the equivalent of 20 18-pounders. By instead having 15 24-pounders. It's useful. It allows her to hit hard. And she really does. She sails in Collingwood's column. She also took part in the Battle of Basque Roads in April 1809. Captured a French privateer in 1810. She has a long service history. And she'd been launched only on the 13th of April, 1805. So the fact she participates in the Battle of Trafalgar is pretty darn cool. She's gone from being launched to being in a major fleet battle in months. Now, this is what I mean about a fleet which is being built for ego. If we consider the French Navy, we often talk about the loss of experience they've had through the loss of the Huguenot officers and then the Revolution, and how all these things have destroyed the cultural memory of the Navy. And we also talk about the loss of their ships that have happened in various incidents at Toulon, etc. And the losses they've sustained in battle thanks to the loss of experience, because they've gone from being really, during the American War of Independence period, one of the best navies, if not the best navy in the world at points, to really nowhere near where they were. One of the ways you can see this is because this is their major fleet, and look at how many of these ships are brand new. Britain is the largest naval power in the world this time. They are. And yet their fleet is nowhere near as homogeneous or as standardized in terms of output as the French fleet. The French, they're all Téméraires. That is a sea of third rates. And the vast majority of those are Téméraires. Yes, there are some Beaucencheurs. And those are lovely ships. They really are. But they are probably the newest design there. The Tonnant, the Beaucencheurs. The Tonnants, which will turn up in a bit, are a design which comes in after the Téméraire. But let's look at this flood of construction. The largest ship, though, completed in all of that period, the newest ship there, is a second-rate HMS Dreadnought, a Neptune-class second-rate of the Royal Navy. And she'd been completed and launched in 1801 with 98 guns. But otherwise, this is a new fleet. And this is a large portion of the French fleet, of the French ships. If we go back to this earlier, and if I make it a full screen, if we go back to this earlier table, you'll see the French supply 25 ships to this battle. And as you can see on here, there are 18 of them, if my maths is correct. 6, 9, 12, 15, sorry. Historians' maths, always double check. Always double check. 15 of them are 1799 onwards. 3/5, 60% of it. These are new ships. They are rapidly built ships as well. They truly are. Again, if we consider Pluton, named for Pluto, she's ordered in 1803, she's laid down in August 1803, she's launched in January 1805, completed in March 1805. And the thing is, the French have had a lot of disruption to their resources. But we consider HMS Revenge there, she'd been laid down in 1800. The British have been fighting a war for years. They lay down the ship in 1800. It's launched in 1805. Why? Because they've been seasoning it, and not just seasoning the wood before they put it in. They've been seasoning the ship as it grows to make sure it's actually the right shape. Because what they find is once you put the wood on, especially you steam it and bend the wood to the shape, it needs time to settle. And the faster you build a wooden ship, the more strains you put in on the wood, and the more issues you can create with its handling later and with its ability to actually stay afloat and the things you need to do. You can get a ship into service and it can be fine, but it's going to give you a lot less of a life expectancy. Now, the thing is, you've also just heard me mention that one of these Temeraire class, well, she's there, the Duguay Truan, aka HMS Implacable, is only scuttled in December 1949. I mean, Britain could literally have had the only 2 surviving ships of the Battle of Trafalgar. Quite happily. She's scuttled in 1949. The sheer fact that happens, I cannot explain this more, but as a historian, that makes me physically want to find the people who were involved in that decision-making process, because some of them, whilst the senior ones who actually made a decision are probably not alive, there are probably some who supported them and helped them in that making a decision, still alive, and asked them a lot of questions about why. But they probably went, well, we have victory, so why do we need another? Well, because it would have been cool to have another. It would have been cool to have had her sitting next to her. Sitting her there. Well, Temeraire class would, 18 of them served in the Royal Navy. They're built by the French. It would have been one thing to wind up the French and go, look, we have also got the only surviving Temeraire class. Aha. Usually that's a good enough reason to get the British government to do anything. Historically, saying you can wind up the French has got the British government to do all sorts of stupid things just for the purpose of... And yet they do not... I just don't understand it. But the smallest vessel at the battle, well, HMS Pickle is also here. She's also a fairly new ship. Now, please note, this is the replica which was built in St. Petersburg in 1996. HMS Pickle is a really cool little ship. She really is. She has an interesting career as well because, well, those who don't know, after the battle, she races to the UK and is the first to arrive, and that's why traditionally in the Royal Navy, their officers celebrate Trafalgar Night. Those who are non-commissioned celebrate Pickle Night, which basically is because when Pickle arrived, the news came through, there was of course spliced in the main brace and a great big party, and so it's Pickle Night. Now, HMS Pickle is a Bermuda sloop. That's her type. And she's actually kind of procured under an interesting story because, well, the Admiralty had issued an order which said that you cannot purchase ships without express permission. In fact, pretty much no. And, well, Vice Admiral at that time, Lord Hugh Seymour, who was the C&C of the Jamaica station, needed some ships to do his duties. So he purchased what was originally called the Sting in December 1800 for £2,500. This was after having leased her already for roughly £10 a day. Very nice income for her owners. Very, very nice income for her owners. The problem with the Admiralty, with arguing with Lord Hugh Seymour, was he was good friends with some very influential people. Most importantly, George IV, King of England and Wales, and Great Britain, and everything. That just, made him an interesting person to deal with. Admittedly, at this time, he was known as George, Prince of Wales, rather than King George IV, but even as Prince of Wales, that's still not someone the Admiralty wants to really annoy. People who have a long-term view of their careers and are, well, let's be honest, looking at George III and going, you're interesting. And of course, George IV would become his regent between 1811 and 1820. Are not really going to take the idea of, let's upset the Prince of Wales by getting rid of his favourite or disciplining him too badly for simply purchasing a ship he needs. So in February 1801, they issue an order accepting her and change her name to Pickle, just as their sign of protest. We get to name her, because she is a pickle. Literally, I think it was some with a sense of humour, because they've gone, well, this has put us in a pickle, what are we going to do? Okay, we'll budget that, but we're going to call that HMS Pickle. There is an interesting discussion as to whether or not she was known as Pickle before the Admiralty made her name change, and as the London Gazette doesn't seem to mention it, but I think possibly that it's the other way around, that this was because it was basically the Royal Navy going, yeah, this is putting us a pickle. But there again, they're the ones who inform the London Gazette and give them the information for the press release. And there's one thing having your joke, there's another thing sticking your joke in front of the world. Politically, there's an issue. So that's why I think the name change came about with the orders. Or alternatively, there is the other option that Seymour changed the name to Pickle because he was giving the Admiralty a pickle to manage and knew he was doing it. And he is the type of person who I could see doing that. Now, she spends most of her time being a tender. But she's also a useful little ship, sailing all over the place, carrying urgent dispatches, and acting as a dispatch ship. And that's how she ends up with Nelson at Trafalgar. She ends up there because she is doing reconnaissance and dispatch work. And Nelson is dearthly short of frigates. If you carved Nelson open and asked him, carved him open his inside, on his inside we written, I will fear losing for want of frigates. Why? Because as many as the Royal Navy has, and trust me, they are pumping them out. They have a lot in service. I'm literally talking hundreds. They never have enough because frigates are doing all the cruising duties. They're doing all the presence duties. They're doing all the doing inshore duties, monitoring the blockade. They're doing the convoy escort duties. They're doing the reconnaissance duties for the fleets. They're carrying the signals backwards and forwards. They're doing the commerce interdiction duties. They're doing everything. Basically, you could have handed the Royal Navy a replicator system, which would be automatically churning out frigates, and they still would have been complaining they did not have enough to do all the duties they needed to do. You'd also need a cloning system to clone crews, but you get the point. So now we're back. We are back to 1798 and earlier, I think, if I remember correctly. Yeah, 1798 and earlier. And you'll see the French ships start to peter off, but there's a fairly large chunk of British ships launched in 1798, including the second-rate Neptune, with 98 guns, who's otherwise known as Temeraire. Yes, this is again the Royal Navy trolling the French, because the French Temeraire class is massively in service. They're providing all sorts of ships for the Royal Navy. The Royal Navy has many Temeraires in service. It is the ultimate troll. Again, it's the Royal Navy. You'll notice there are some fifth rates, and there's an Acata, which is another French vessel, the Entrante. And there is another Neptune class. There is Neptune herself. And so 3 of the Royal Navy's second rates come from the same class, the Neptune class. The 4th is a London class, HMS Prince. But this is an important thing for the Royal Navy. It's not just the French who are doing classes. The Royal Navy are also doing classes. One of the interesting things I often have to explain is, when I'm discussing the Age of Sail, is that they are still built in classes, but it is almost slightly more bespoke, and sometimes what qualifies the class can be a different thing. In that your classes can be built over many decades, like they are today. They can experience changes. They can experience developments, evolutions in their design. They're still the same class. They're still the same organization. And when I don't stick ships in a class, it doesn't mean they don't necessarily belong to a class when they were built or they were designed to. It's just that I've decided that, frankly, they are standalone enough, or the class they are supposed to belong to is basically a class for the sake of calling it a class, when actually they might as well be 6 different ships. So that's why I then don't give them a class. Now what's really interesting is at this point you start to get Spanish ships coming in as well, and it's worthwhile considering these. They are all, as we can see, third rates. Barring first rate at the bottom there, the Santa Ana class, Principe de Austria. 112 guns. She's a big first rate. And she is the youngest first rate at the battle. She is the youngest first rate. The Royal Navy's younger first rates, they're all elsewhere in the world in this battle at this battle time. The new second rates are there, but their first rates, they're elsewhere. Again, you have more Temeraire class. You even, of course, have Temeraire class fighting for the Royal Navy. You have the Belle-Île, which is fighting there, and it's for some reason listed as having 74 guns, whereas the Phoebe below her is listed as having 36. Let me just swap that round. That's better. You also notice the Royal Navy does have an 80-gun third rate there, but it's the French-built Tonnant of the Tonnant class. Yes, the Royal Navy had captured and kept the name of the namesake of the French Tonnant class. So it's kind of, you know, the French have brought other Tonnants here, but the British have the Tonnant of the Tonnant class. It's just the Royal Navy being the Royal Navy. It really is. The French do have more, are supplying these 80-gun vessels, and of course you do have Neptuno, an 80-gun vessel of the Armada Española. But yeah, the real stars you have on this page, on this slide, it has to be the Principe de Austria. It's 112 guns. It's a really, really cool ship. But I would say you've also got a Neptune class for sheer churning out a class of second rates. And that was part of the Royal Navy's thinking when they were building second rates. One of the interesting things you find is that the Royal Navy are really the ones who invest in second rates slightly more than any other navy. Because for most navies, it's a case of, well, if we're going to build anything, we might as well build a first rate or a third rate. We either want to build volume, third rates, or we want to build for pure fighting power, the largest, most powerful unit we can get. And that's one of the reasons why the French fleet is quite so uniform and quite so third-rate-ish. Because, well, they want numbers. The British, the reason they are chucking in some second rates is because it's not much less than a first rate, but it is a bit less than a first rate in terms of costs. And if you're dealing with especially the Spanish Navy, they have some very high ships. And the trouble is, if you're 2 decks and they're all 3 decks, they can fire down on you. And they will do. And that can cause you a lot of trouble, especially in boarding and other issues. So the Royal Navy tends to go through phases of going, we need to actually have some 3-decker ships, because we can't afford to have our opponents being able to fire down all our ships. We practically, third rates will do the job for us, but we can't afford that tactical disadvantage. And so that's why you're building the second rates, literally to get the third deck. Most famous ship of the battle. There's no argument on that. Let's be honest, Victory is the most famous ship from the Battle of Trafalgar. Principally because that's what Nelson's aboard, and Nelson's the commander of the winning fleet, and he dies in his moment of victory, and therefore becomes, as Professor Andrew Lambert, my old PhD supervisor would put it, PhD supervisor. I forget the first part of the previous sentence. Becomes Britannia's god of war. She is an amazing ship to wander around, well worth a visit. But let's think about HMS Victory. Let's think about it. She is laid down in 1759. So, 1759. Take off 300 years from there. 300 years from 1759. You are, again, back in the 1450s. 1460s, maybe. 200 to 300 years is the length of time they were looking at for their ideal oaks for some of the key pieces of wood on these ships. And she is launched in 1765. Her first commissioning is 1778. So at the Battle of Trafalgar, she's 40 years old. At the Battle of Trafalgar, she's already participated in terms of major fleet battles, the Battle of Ushant, first battle, the second Battle of Ushant, the Battle of Cape Spartiel, the Battle of the Hayes Islands, the Battle of Cape St. Vincent. She is a 104 gun, first-rate ship of the line. One of the finest sailing ships in the Royal Navy, capable of up to 11 knots. She is based on the design that was used for the Royal George, but the thing about first rates is that they are all so individual that it is rare you have a class of them. The only navy which really builds a class of them are the Spanish. And the reason they're building class of them is they're building for deterrence. Having the biggest, most powerful ships in the world is useful for the Spanish Navy. Why? Because they're never going to have the numbers to be in the place they need to be. And if they want to secure their empire, if they want to secure their treasure fleets, the movements of their goods, then they need their convoys to be really scary. And therefore, having the biggest ship there is scary. You can go, well, other ships of the line can take it on. Yes, but you look at it. Usually when the British are tangling with a first rate, they want to send, if they've only got third rates, they want 2 or 3 to send against it. Because of its advantage in terms of height, being able to fire down, because of the weight of shot its cannon usually carry. All these things match up and add up when you're dealing with a first rate. And that's part of the scenario the Royal Navy's got to factor into. It's part of the scenario the Royal Navy's got to think about. And it's not just the Royal Navy which the Armada Española has to worry about. They also have to worry about the Marine Nationale. They have to worry about the French, who have taken their ships as well. If you've been looking at the slides when they come up, and looking at the sources of their ships, you'll notice that there's a third rate here called the Intrépide, which the French have got from the Spanish. There are various Marine Nationale ship vessels appearing in the Royal Navy. Yes, they've got Belle-Île, they've got Sparshett, who are both Temeraire class, and they've got Tonnant, of course, of Tonnant class. But the Spanish ships, they're turning up in the French Navy. So, for the Spanish, there is a reason they're supplying the biggest ships at this battle. There is a reason when they turn up with a lot less ships than the French. 15 to 25. There's our 15 ships of the line to 18 French ones. Guess who just noticed he forgot to change Franco to French? Anyway, leaving that to one side. And if we consider the French fleet, they are 18 third rates. Mostly 74s, but they do have some 80s. Spanish have 4 first rates. In terms of combat power, the actual fleet and actual contributions is about equal when you're looking at the Spanish fleet and the French fleet, despite the French having 10 more ships. Because the Spanish have concentrated on building very big, very strong, very present ships, which were supposed to deter conflict, were supposed to deter the enemy from attacking them and defend their empire. Again, there is a difference in the fleets, and there is a difference in the fleets they're drawing from. The fleets at Trafalgar are a snapshot of the wider fleets. That's what they are. They give you a snapshot. So they don't give you a complete image. You can't draw everything from them, but they do give you a decent snapshot of the fleets, of what's available. Because let's be honest, if you're the Spanish and the French in this scenario, you're going to be sending the best ships you have available to send. With the Royal Navy, largely, and this is a bit annoying for Nelson, it's largely what he got given. In fact, you could argue it's actually even less than that, because the lovely Admiral Calder had, instead of staying around to assist Nelson in Trafalgar, which would probably have got him great glory and great respect at home, decided to go home after his battle because he was annoyed with the Admiralty over something. And then, of course, about their treatment of the Battle of Cape Finisterre. And he took his flagship and a couple of some other ships home with him. And the thing is, those ships could have been at Trafalgar. They would have added even more ships to the fleet. But they're not, because Calder decided to go home. He didn't think it was necessary to stay. And I've done videos about Calder and about his decision-making process and the Battle of Cape Finisterre. But there are some pretty useful ships which the Royal Navy had in the area and should have been, realistically, should have been part of the fleet at Trafalgar, which go home because Calder's going home. And Calder had commanded a fleet of 15 ships versus ships of the line, and with 2 frigates, a lugger and a cutter, assisting him against 20 ships of the line and 7 frigates, and he'd won that battle. He captured 2 of the Franco-Spanish fleet at that battle. That is an average victory, but it's 15 versus 20. Now, if we consider Trafalgar, well, that's 27 versus 33. One's a roughly 5-to-4 ratio, and one's heading for a 5-to-4 ratio. The other one is a 4-to-3 ratio. So, Cape Finisterre is good, but those ships could have been useful at Trafalgar. So, what am I saying? What I'm saying is that what you're seeing in terms of the Royal Navy and all these navies is a good snapshot which gives you a good introduction to what's going on in their fleets. The mass production in the French Navy as they're trying to go back and rebuild themselves up to what they were. But the trouble is, it takes a lot more than just building ships, especially building ships quickly to do that. But, and denuding the forests of Europe in order to build those ships. Trust me, to build the Temeraires, the French are basically cutting down trees everywhere. I mean, the forests in Germany never saw so much action. But leaving that to one side, they are imperfect because of other things going on. Some of the French ships, quite a lot of their good ships, are trapped in northern French ports, in some of the northern European ports. Some of them are back in southern France with no out the crews to take them to sea. And it's the same with the Spanish. They have ships all over the world. So, it's a good snapshot. And then we have... This, believe it or not, are not the earliest ships. Students start to notice that the Royal Navy, though, and the French Navy's petering out. They are the oldest French ship there, which is actually a Royal Navy ship. It's Elizabeth class, third rate, HMS Berwick. And the third oldest ship there is another Elizabeth class, HMS Swiftsure. There's actually two Swiftstures in this battle. There's the British-built one, which is serving in the French Navy, and there's the other one, which is serving in the Royal Navy, which the British have built again. Because the British like the name Swiftsure. They really do. And there's also another Temeraire. And then you've got some of the Royal Navy's first rates. You have the Royal Sovereign. It's nice to be there. It's a good ship to have. It's a useful ship to have. And it's 1/3 of the Royal Navy's first rates at this battle. It's also the youngest first rate for the Royal Navy at this battle. The rest of the ships here are third rates. Again, they're Elizabeth class in service here. And an Ardent class, HMS Agamemnon, which is a 64 gun. And an Inflexible class, HMS Africa, which is also a 64 gun, the older style third rates. Most interesting here, we have a 140 gun first rate, which I'll be talking about in a bit. But yeah, this is where the real strength of the Spanish fleet starts to come through, where the Armada Español really shows their strength. And by the way, anyone who's wondering why I'm referring to them as the Armada Español, that's what they've always been sort of referred to in my notes as. Years ago, I put together tables and picked colours for all sorts of battles and all sorts of things, because this is what a geeky 15-year-old who really likes naval history, who's just found out all sorts of fun macros he can write in Excel, can do. And I built all sorts of tables. And I've been going through and rebuilding those tables, and in some cases redesigning them. And finding some errors which have crept in the moving around process as I've been sort of putting them together and shaping them up. But no, it's always nice when you find resources that you created 20 years ago which are useful for you presenting now. Number one rule of academia: if you can reuse slides, if you can reuse data, do so. Now, most guns, largest ship at a battle, the Nuestra Señora de la Santísima Trinidad. Pretty much, and I want to just put this out there, pretty much a 4-decker. Okay? Why am I saying that? Well, you can argue about whether or not she's a 4-decker because technically, if she has, in saying she's having 4 complete gun decks, some of those, at least 4 of those, are quite small guns on the upper deck, unsurprisingly. But 4-decker ships, you've got the USS Pennsylvania, you've got the French Valmy, and the British never built the Duke of Kent, which was going to be a 170 gun 4-decker. They never built the Duke of Kent. So this is built by Spain to provide themselves with a massive amount of firepower. She was probably the largest warship in the world until the Ocean and the Orient of the French Navy's 120 guns appeared. The French, in 1790s, they were 118 gun 3-deckers, and they were massive for their time. But the Spanish responded in 1795 by joining her forecastle to her quarterdeck and adding in what was a battery of 8-pounder guns, which gave her 130 guns at that point. They then reduced it down to 130 guns because it was causing issues. And then they worked on that some more. And at various points, she goes up in guns as they start to make additions. And they start to make modifications. She had been an 112 gunner as built. Had been. And even when I say 140 guns for her, and that is often the stat we use for her, there is a debate about that. There are some people who put it down to 130 guns for the whole career and discount some of the 8-pounders. Others include them. There was a debate at the time amongst a lot of senior officers, even officers in service at the time, that she should be restricted to defending the Bay of Cadiz because she was just such a poor sailing vessel because of her top weight. And so I have called her a 140 gun ship. I'm talking about her as if she is. But honestly, there is a good chance that sensible officers looking at the waters going out will have gone, yeah, we're taking some of those guns off. Or sometimes what they did was they took the guns and they stowed them down below. So they used the guns, the smaller guns from the top, which were top weight, and they added them into the hull of the ship, as low as they could put them in the ship to make them ballast and lower the center of mass. Sorry, my brain kept going, centrifugal, and I was going, that's not wrong. Alright, that is wrong. Center of mass. And, of course, by lowering the center of mass, you're also lowering the other phrase, which we like to use when we talk about naval ships and stability, the metacentrical height. And that's, of course, the metacentric height is the difference and sort of the measurement between the center of gravity on a ship and its center, its metacenter. Stability matters, and to use these ships, to use their guns, to use them as capably as you want to use them, you actually do need to worry about stability. Wood is an incredibly forgiving substance to build ships out of. It naturally floats. It naturally provides you with a lot of safety and a lot of security in terms of staying afloat and taking a lot of damage and easy to repair. All those things are true, but you cannot abuse it. You still need to obey the laws of physics, more importantly, respect the sea. This ship had issues with those things. It really did. And yeah. There's only so much you can do, though, when you've got politicians and political admirals going, but we need to be bigger in order to deter them. We need to be bigger. We need to be scarier. Our ship needs to be more powerful. Yeah, but there's only so much you can do. And again, they didn't go building... They're building the St. Annas. This one is... Well, she's not their oldest of their first rates at the battle. She isn't, because there is the Roya there. But she's not exactly their youngest one either. And now we have the oldest ships of the battle. And they're first rates mostly. We've got Victory. She is not the oldest, as I've already said, but she's not even the oldest British ship. Not even the oldest first rate for the Royal Navy there. That's Britannia. There's also a third rate, Bellona, HMS Defence, the Bellona class, the 74 there. And, as said, the oldest is the Roya of the Armada Española. There are no French ships in this area. If we consider, we go back again, you see very few French ships turning up, and then later on it's such a rush of French ships. They are very new. It's a rush build. It's a focus build. Yes, it's a years of rushing build, but if we consider Britain and France has very similar levels of maritime infrastructure and industry at this time, and yet the British fleet is far more spread out. It's far more of a mixture. We have 3 nice 74s for the Spanish Navy. And the Roya. Now, the Roya is a lovely ship. It really is. It's one of those ships which you look at and go, this is a well-designed vessel. But the really interesting thing you might notice here is that says 80 cannon there. What happened? Well, she starts off life as an 80-gun ship. That's what she's designed as. She is an 80-gun Rayo-class ship of the line. So she's a third rate. And in 1803, she has a rebuild. She's rebuilt at Cartagena dockyard. And they decided to do similar to what they had done to the Nuestra Señora de la Santísima Trinidad. The Santísima Trinidad, as it's more often known. I've talked about previously. They went, you know what, we have a great third rate here. It's a really good design. You know what would make it better? Let's make it a first rate with 100 guns. And so she goes up from having 30 24-pounders, 32 18-pounders, and 18 8-pounders, and 2 3-pounders, to having 30 36-pounder guns, still retaining the 32 18-pounder guns, but growing to 32 8-pounder guns. Yes, what they did was they basically linked her quarterdeck and forecastle and added in a load of 8-pounders. Now think about that. They've added 16 8-pounder guns. Actually no, not even 16. They've added 14 8-pounder guns. And they add in 6 18-pounder carronades as well. So they've increased her broadside firepower in terms of weight by Well, 7 times 8, which, by my count, and please note this is by my count, is £56. And 3 18-pounders, which is a further 54. So they've added on £110 of throw weight to a broadside. And let's be honest, the carronades are not going to be as long a range as even the 8-pounders are, but let's be honest, the 8-pounders and the are not probably going to have as much of a throw damage as the 18-pounders. So what have you really gained? If we consider the earlier example I gave, which was the heavy 74, which compared to a traditional 74 carried an extra £90 of throw weight. You know, had an extra, the equivalent of an extra 5 18-pounder guns. You could have, theoretically, got quite a lot of that weight if you'd left there as an 80-gun ship and just upped the 18-pounders on the upper gun deck to 24-pounders, when you upped the lower gun deck to 36-pounders. I suppose the 36-pounders from that does give you, that, I must admit, does give you an extra £360 in terms of weight thrown, so I should acknowledge that, and I will acknowledge that. But for the issue it's going to add to the top weight, etc., I'd have said going the 36-pounder upgrade and going with maybe a 24-pounder upgrade to the 18-pounder guns on the mid deck, on the upper gun deck, and leaving it alone would have probably been a better solution. There is no surprise to me that she is dismasted at the Battle of Trafalgar because of her handling. They managed to get her out of the battle, and they send her to sea again after the battle to try and recapture the prizes. And it's during this effort, after the Battle of Trafalgar, she's actually captured by HMS Donegal. Now, you're going to wonder, what is Donegal? Well, she's a Temeraire class that the British captured. They capture her. And they captured this Temeraire class. And using this Temeraire class, this 74-gun ship, they managed to capture the Rail. Unfortunately, the British prize crew then run into a storm and she's wrecked on 26th of October. At which point, the British prize crew decide to set her ablaze and destroy her on the 31st of October. So she survives the Battle of Trafalgar, gets dismasted but gets away. And then afterwards, because again of her handling issues, is able to be outfought by a 74-gun ship. Shouldn't have happened. Let's be honest, as an 80-gun vessel, she should not have been outfought by a 74-gun. It's a closer run thing, but considering she's got 36-pounders, etc., she should have been able to do, and with the manoeuvring, she should have been roughly the same. So it should have come down to her ability for her crew to fight, and her crew could fight. They just fought in the Battle of Trafalgar. They'd done really well. They kept their ship going, and they managed to get it out of the fight when others had lost their head and lost their ships. And yet, she's outfought. Because again, someone has had a bright idea about doing something which gives them the image of having strength without truly having strength. It's a deterrence force. Battle of Trafalgar. It's always one of those battles which has so many different layers to it. In fact, pretty much all battles have layers to it. Because On a certain level, you look at it from the tactics done and the strategy and the context of the wider campaign and Trafalgar campaign that builds up to the battle. You look at all those things, and you see a picture of the navies and their approach to war and to the conflict, and how the different nations are valuing what they're getting involved in. And that gives you one view. And then you look at the ships and their construction. That can give you a whole different view. You combine all of that together, and you can get a whole lot of analysis. And it can give you a very interesting image of what has gone on and what was going on at the time. The thing you have to remember about these ships is they are major projects. In Henry VIII's time, you could either order a huge tapestry or a warship that were roughly about the same cost. A huge tapestry. The sort of tapestry you had to show your power and wealth as a king, to impress other monarchs, to hang on your wall. They're gorgeous. Gorgeous things. By the time we are talking about, these ships cost a lot more than a wall hanging. A lot more. They are major investments by nation states that signify the importance of sea power in all its forms. That is both as an ability to prosecute military campaigns as well as to protect commerce and secure economic security. The time frame and the level of investment shows to me in many ways the difference in the ideas going on. The Spanish had been consistent. The Spanish had been invested in navies. Yet, in this period, you're talking about a great malaise entering Spanish government and Spanish planning, and that's why things had dropped off. That's why they keep having these bright ideas about upgrading ships instead of building better ones. It's not due to lack of skill, they're yards or they're architects. Trust me, you couldn't do the upgrade work if you don't have skilled architects and skilled yards. But the thing is, they're not willing to go for the whole expense of building a whole new ship, or the risk of building a whole new ship in their mind. The British have been doing this continued investment, this continued growth, this continued development. And that's why their ships are scattered through the years quite as much as they are. And the French, well, they've had huge chunks taken out of their population, of their leadership and of their investment. And so they come in gluts. You either get a huge amount or nothing. Huge amount or nothing. And this has impacts on all these navies in different ways. It shows their value, it shows their role, but it also shows the national philosophy. There is this great quote attributed to Napoleon to do with planting trees along roads so that his troops will have shade to march along them. And they were going, well, you know, they won't give shade for 40 years, then we must plant them now. This is to show Napoleon's long-term thinking. And yet when it comes to navies, he doesn't understand they're not infantry battalions. You can't stand them up in months. It takes years, decades of investment. And once you throw away what you have, it's very difficult to rebuild what you've lost. It really is. Now, the coolest ship of the Battle of Trafalgar, it goes to HMS Africa. Please note, I have done this discussion many times, and there are many videos on my channel about Africa, because Africa is one of my favourite ships of all time. Let's put it this way. You turn up at the Battle of Trafalgar, you are a 64-gun ship. You are a smallest of the third-rate ships online. You're looking at the battle. You're going, right then, well, my fleet's formed up in two columns. I wasn't there for them to. I've been separated by storms and things, and so I'm turning out late. I have a choice. There is the Franco-Spanish fleet. I could sail that way, tack into one of the columns. That is a perfectly respectable thing to do. Or I can sail straight at the enemy. They sailed at the enemy with such confidence, such verve, that for a while the Franco-Spanish fleet were certain that they were the tip of a spear, that there must be more ships coming behind them, because no single ship would be so brave, so foolhardy to take on the entire Franco-Spanish fleet. In fact, you could argue, from a positioning, if we go right back to the beginning, you can argue that she does the most traditional job of all. Because coming in the line position she's coming in at the top there, she is the only British ship which is actually engaging in line of battle. So she is the only one following the traditional route, where fleets would sail in line alongside each other, blasting away, because, you know, it was considered the sheer amount of artillery. If it's a well-structured, well-organised line, you cannot break it. She is doing the traditional thing, solo. After the battle, she is absolutely smacked. She isn't captured by the Franco-Spanish fleet. She isn't. She survives. She's towed away, and she carries on fighting. She carries on doing all sorts of operations for the Royal Navy. She had been ordered in 1778. She'd been laid down in 1778, and she was launched in 1781. She'd already fought in the Battle of Cuddalore during the American Revolutionary War. And when she takes part in the French Revolutionary Wars, she has all sorts of fun actions, including, assisting Leviathan in dealing with shore batteries of Haiti. And, of course, she's at the Battle of Trafalgar under the command of Henry Digby. This picture of her is her taking part in the Gunboat War. Always fun to have. But, it's a good duty if you can get it. It's a good duty if you can get it. And this was against Danish gunboats. She even operates during the War of 1812. She's part of the squadron that fails to catch the USS Constitution. And she's one of the ships which actually comes closest. So, Africa. Coolest ship without doubt at the Battle of Trafalgar. So, I always finish videos with a question, and I'm not going to change this habit now. Other than victory, if you could preserve any of the ships of Trafalgar, any one of them, which one would you like to preserve and why? I'd love to hear what people think, what they would like to preserve. I would like to preserve any of them, but I have to say is one, which you might have already noticed, I am particularly annoyed about. And that, of course, is the Due Trun, aka HMS Implacable, aka surviving until 1949, and a Temeraire class, which I would love to have an example preserved because they were the most produced class of age of sail ships of the line of any era ever, and having one of them around would have been a really useful insight into some of the construction techniques used. But yeah, I'd love to hear what you think. What else have we got coming up? We have got
We have battleships and battle cruisers that might have been on 24th of October. That's going to be cool. We have 31st of October 2023. We have viewer suggestion number 4. I'm still waiting for suggestions coming in for that one. Viewer suggestion number 3 was fun, but I haven't put it in here. I should have updated it with that. But I'm still looking at comments for people's viewer suggestions. And unrotated projectiles to hypersonic missiles on the 7th of November. Oh, that's going to be a fun one. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you're well. Hope you enjoyed life. The live, which is going to be... This is going to go out on Wednesday now. Because it's far too late on the Tuesday for this to go out. I've re-recorded about 3 times today. And in sections. So, bits which are best are going to be used. But some bits I might have to use if I use some of the earlier bits where I had some of the slides wrong. We'll leave that to one side. Norway stands. World War II if Norway repels the German invasion. That's going to be a fun patron. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Take care.